The lake was more than just water, it was the heart of the community, a place where families gathered on summer weekends and memories were made beneath the sun. Nestled among rolling hills and shaded by towering pines, it was the kind of place people dreamed of escaping to. And at its center stood the bridge, a weathered but sturdy structure that had connected both sides of the lake for decades. For residents like me, it wasn't just a means of crossing from one side to the other, it was a symbol of unity, a reminder of simpler times when neighbors helped neighbors without hesitation. But all of that changed the day the HOA decided to take matters into their own hands. Without warning, without discussion, they arrived with machinery and manpower, tearing down the very bridge that had served our community for years. They claimed it was unsafe, that it needed replacement, that the cost of repairs was too high. But to us, those who lived here, who had crossed that bridge countless times, it felt like an act of betrayal. We weren't consulted, we weren't given a chance to voice our concerns, and suddenly, we were left stranded, cut off from each other. The aftermath was chaos. Families couldn't visit loved ones across the lake, local businesses suffered as foot traffic dwindled, and tensions flared between homeowners and the HOA board. Accusations flew in every direction: neglect, corruption, abuse of power. The once harmonious community was now divided, with some siding with the HOA and others seeing them as overreaching bureaucrats with no regard for the people they were supposed to serve. As the days passed, frustration turned into something darker. The bridge wasn't just gone, it was erased, replaced with nothing but an empty space where trust used to be. And then, in a moment of desperation, I made a decision that would change everything. For as long as anyone could remember, the bridge had been the lifeblood of our lakeside community. It wasn't just a way to get from one side of the lake to the other, it was a gathering point, a meeting place, a silent witness to generations of laughter, tears, and shared experiences. On warm summer nights, teenagers would sit on its worn wooden planks, watching fireworks reflect off the water. Fishermen lined its edges at dawn, casting their lines into the lake's depths while sharing stories from past seasons. Parents pushed strollers across its surface, pointing out ducks gliding past, teaching their children the names of birds nesting in the reeds. Even in winter, when ice clung to its rails, the bridge remained a fixture in our lives, a constant presence that tethered us together. Built nearly half a century ago, the bridge had seen its share of wear and tear. Over the years, maintenance crews patched cracks in the decking, reinforced rusting railings, and repainted faded signs warning against speeding. But despite its age, it had always held strong. No one ever questioned its safety, not until the HOA got involved. To most of us, the idea of removing the bridge was unthinkable. Yes, it was old, but so were many things in our community: old homes with creaky floors, old trees shading front porches, old friendships that had lasted lifetimes. There was talk of repairing it, of raising funds to give it a new lease on life, but those discussions never gained traction. Instead, the HOA moved swiftly, making decisions behind closed doors, offering vague justifications that did little to soothe the growing unease among residents. When the demolition crews arrived, it felt surreal. One morning, we woke up to find heavy machinery rumbling along the shoreline, workers in bright orange vests preparing to dismantle the bridge piece by piece. Some of us rushed to the scene, desperate to understand what was happening, only to be met with curt responses and clipped reassurances. "It's not safe," they said. "We have to replace it." But there was no mention of a timeline, no clear plan for how we would function without it. Just the sound of hammers striking wood, the groan of metal being torn apart, and the slow realization that something irreplaceable was slipping away before our eyes. By the end of the week, the bridge was gone. In its place, there was only an expanse of open water and an eerie silence where laughter used to echo. Boats had become our only means of travel, but not everyone owned one, and those who did found themselves ferrying neighbors back and forth, turning simple errands into logistical nightmares. Children missed school because their parents couldn't reach the bus stop on the opposite shore. Elderly residents were stranded, unable to access medical appointments or essential supplies. The rhythm of daily life had been disrupted, and with it, a sense of normalcy that we hadn't realized we took for granted. The loss of the bridge wasn't just inconvenient, it was personal. It represented history, tradition, and connection. And now, it was gone, taken without warning, without consultation, without regard for the people who called this place home. At first glance, the Homeowners Association, HOA, seemed like a necessary evil, a group tasked with maintaining order, ensuring property values remained stable, and overseeing communal spaces. Most of us paid our dues without question, trusting that they acted in the best interest of the community. But as the dust settled after the bridge's destruction, a deeper truth began to emerge. The HOA wasn't just a governing body, it was a machine fueled by unchecked authority, financial mismanagement, and a troubling lack of transparency. The official explanation for the bridge's removal was straightforward: safety concerns. According to the HOA board, inspections had revealed structural weaknesses that posed a risk to residents. They cited reports filled with technical jargon, claiming that costly repairs would be required to bring the bridge up to code. But when pressed for details, the board offered little more than vague assurances. Residents requested copies of these inspection reports, only to be told they were confidential due to legal liability concerns. The secrecy only deepened suspicions. If the bridge was truly unsafe, why had no one noticed? Why had no warnings been issued prior to the demolition? Then came the matter of finances. The HOA had long been criticized for its opaque budgeting practices, but few had fully grasped the extent of the issue until now. As rumors spread about questionable expenditures, residents began digging deeper. What they uncovered was alarming. Millions of dollars had been allocated for infrastructure improvements, yet the only visible project was the resort, an extravagant development that catered primarily to seasonal visitors rather than year-round residents. Luxury cabins, a state-of-the-art clubhouse, and an expansive pool complex had been constructed with funds supposedly earmarked for community-wide enhancements. Meanwhile, basic maintenance tasks, road repairs, drainage fixes, even routine landscaping, had been neglected for years. The disparity was glaring. While the HOA poured resources into a commercial venture that benefited a select few, the rest of the community struggled with crumbling sidewalks, failing septic systems, and, now, a destroyed bridge that left residents stranded. When confronted, the board defended their actions, insisting that the resort was a revenue-generating asset that would ultimately benefit everyone through increased property values. But to those of us living here full-time, it felt like a bait-and-switch, a promise of prosperity that had come at our expense. Beyond the financial missteps, there was a broader pattern of authoritarian control. Decisions that should have been subject to community input were made unilaterally, often with little regard for public opinion. Dissenting voices were dismissed, sometimes outright silenced. Those who raised concerns about the HOA's spending habits or governance style found themselves ostracized, labeled as troublemakers unwilling to support progress. Board members operated with impunity, shielded by a combination of legal protections and the apathy of those who assumed the system worked in their favor. It became increasingly clear that the bridge's destruction was not an isolated incident, it was part of a larger pattern of disregard. The HOA had prioritized aesthetics over necessity, profit over practicality, and control over collaboration. And now, with the bridge gone and the community fractured, the consequences of their unchecked power were impossible to ignore. In the wake of the bridge's destruction, the once cohesive fabric of our lakeside community began to unravel. Conversations that had previously centered around weekend barbecues and neighborhood gatherings now revolved around anger, confusion, and blame. At first, the outrage was directed at the HOA, but as tensions escalated, fault lines emerged within the community itself. Neighbors who had once shared coffee on porches now avoided eye contact, and friendships strained under the weight of conflicting loyalties. Some residents sided with the HOA, convinced that the bridge had indeed been a safety hazard. They argued that the association had simply done what was necessary, even if it had been abrupt and poorly communicated. Better safe than sorry, they insisted, citing the potential risks of a collapsing structure. Others pointed to the resort as evidence that the HOA had ulterior motives, suggesting that the bridge's removal had less to do with safety and more to do with clearing the way for commercial expansion. These theories gained traction, especially among those who had already grown skeptical of the association's financial dealings. Meanwhile, those who had lost the most, the elderly unable to cross the lake, families separated by the sudden barrier, small business owners struggling with declining foot traffic, felt abandoned. Their frustration boiled over in heated town hall meetings, where tempers flared and accusations flew. Some demanded immediate action, calling for the bridge to be rebuilt or, at the very least, for alternative transportation solutions to be put in place. Others advocated for legal recourse, discussing lawsuits and petitions to hold the HOA accountable. But amidst the clamor for justice, a creeping sense of helplessness took root. The HOA had made its decision, and short of extreme measures, there seemed to be little we could do to reverse it. And then, in the midst of the chaos, a thought took hold, one that started as a whisper of defiance and grew into something far more dangerous. The anger simmered for weeks, festering beneath the surface as frustration gave way to resignation. Town halls devolved into shouting matches, petitions went unanswered, and legal threats were met with cold indifference. The HOA had made its stance clear: the bridge was gone, and there were no plans to replace it anytime soon. To them, it was a necessary sacrifice for progress. To us, it was a wound that refused to heal. But I couldn't accept that. Not after watching my neighbor struggle to haul groceries across the lake in a wobbly canoe. Not after seeing a mother frantically wave for help when her child wandered onto the wrong side of the lake and couldn't get back. Not after realizing that the community I had known for decades was slipping away, piece by piece, under the weight of bureaucratic arrogance. I had spent years trying to work within the system, attending meetings, writing letters, even volunteering on committees in hopes of influencing change from within. But every attempt had been met with dismissive smiles and empty promises. The HOA was untouchable, protected by layers of legal immunity and financial leverage. They knew we had no real power, no way to force their hand. And maybe, in the beginning, I believed them. But desperation has a way of shifting perspectives. One night, as I sat on my porch staring at the empty stretch of water where the bridge used to stand, I thought about the dam. It was older than the bridge, built decades ago to regulate the lake's water levels and prevent flooding during heavy rains. From what I understood, it was rarely touched except for routine inspections. The controls were manual, gears, levers, and gates that hadn't been adjusted in years. The HOA didn't manage the dam, it was overseen by a separate municipal agency responsible for flood control. But that distinction meant little to me in that moment. If the HOA wanted to play games, then so be it. The idea formed slowly at first, like embers catching dry leaves. What if I could remind them of something they had conveniently forgotten? The lake was more than just a scenic backdrop for their resort, it was a force of nature, one that could be wielded if necessary. The dam was the key. If I could open it, release enough water, the lake level would drop significantly. The resort, perched precariously near the shoreline, would be exposed, its foundations weakened, its structures vulnerable. Maybe, just maybe, it would finally force the HOA to listen. It was reckless, I knew that. Dangerous, even. But so was demolishing a bridge without warning and leaving an entire community stranded. So was pouring millions into a luxury development while neglecting the needs of everyday residents. If they were willing to play hardball, then so was I. I told myself it was about balance, that I wasn't trying to destroy anything, just create leverage. But deep down, I knew the line between protest and retaliation was razor thin. Still, as I lay awake that night, listening to the wind rustle through the trees and imagining the look on the HOA board's faces when they saw the drained lake, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. I waited until midnight, when the world was cloaked in darkness and silence. Armed with a flashlight, a pair of thick gloves, and sheer determination, I made my way toward the dam. The path was familiar, I had walked it countless times during childhood summers, skipping stones along the water's edge and watching boats drift lazily past. But tonight, the air carried a different weight, thick with tension and purpose. The dam loomed ahead, its concrete walls standing as a testament to human ingenuity and nature's quiet fury. I had studied its mechanisms in the days leading up to this moment, piecing together information from old blueprints and online forums dedicated to civil engineering. It wasn't complicated, just a series of gears, levers, and sluice gates designed to regulate the lake's water levels. The main gate was locked, secured with a rusted padlock that looked like it hadn't been tampered with in years. I pulled out a crowbar and wedged it between the links, applying pressure until the lock snapped free. With a final glance over my shoulder to ensure I was alone, I stepped inside. The air was damp, the scent of mildew and stagnant water clinging to the stone walls. My flashlight beam swept across rows of rusted valves and ancient gauges, their numbers faded but still legible. This was it, the moment of reckoning. I approached the primary gate mechanism, a massive wheel that controlled the flow of water. My hands tightened around the spokes, muscles straining as I turned it counterclockwise. At first, nothing happened. Then, with a groan of protest, the wheel budged, and the gate shuddered open. Water gushed through the opening, a rush of movement that sent ripples echoing through the chamber. I kept turning, pushing harder, forcing the gate wider until the roar of rushing water drowned out all other sound. Outside, the lake responded immediately. The surface rippled violently as the current surged downward, pulling water from the basin and exposing sections of the lakebed that hadn't seen daylight in decades. By morning, the effects would be undeniable. I stayed just long enough to make sure the mechanism wouldn't jam shut before stepping back, wiping sweat from my brow. My pulse pounded in my ears as I retraced my steps, heart hammering with a mixture of adrenaline and dread. I had done it. The lake was draining, and the HOA's precious resort would soon be sitting on unstable ground. As I slipped back into the shadows, one thought echoed in my mind: let's see how they handle this. By sunrise, the transformation was undeniable. The once placid surface of the lake had receded dramatically, revealing muddy banks and patches of cracked earth where water had pooled for generations. Boat docks stood suspended in midair, their ramps ending abruptly above exposed sediment. Seawalls leaned precariously, stripped of the buoyancy that had kept them stable for decades. And at the center of it all, the resort, once a gleaming beacon of luxury nestled along the shoreline, stood on uncertain ground, its foundation compromised by the sudden shift in water levels. Residents awoke to a surreal landscape, their usual morning routines interrupted by the sight of a drastically altered environment. Word spread quickly, carried by frantic phone calls, stunned social media posts, and the distant hum of emergency vehicles converging on the lakefront. Within hours, the entire community was abuzz with speculation. Had there been a malfunction? A natural disaster? Or worse, was this deliberate sabotage? The HOA board reacted with immediate alarm, scrambling to assess the damage. Engineers were dispatched to inspect the dam, while environmental agencies were alerted to monitor the ecological impact. News helicopters circled overhead, capturing footage of the drained lakebed and broadcasting it to a stunned audience. Reporters descended upon the area, eager to interview witnesses and uncover the truth behind the unprecedented event. Inside the HOA headquarters, panic set in. Meetings were hastily arranged, phones rang non-stop, and board members exchanged worried glances as they tried to determine the cause and the culprit. The resort, their prized investment, was now a liability. Cracks had begun to form in the foundation of several buildings, and the retaining walls surrounding the complex showed signs of instability. Insurance adjusters arrived, demanding answers. Legal teams were summoned, preparing for the inevitable fallout. Yet, amid the chaos, one question loomed over everything: who had done this? The storm of media attention and public outrage forced the HOA to act swiftly, though their response was anything but graceful. Within hours of the lake's dramatic transformation, the board convened an emergency meeting, their faces pale with disbelief and fear. The atmosphere was electric, charged with urgency and desperation. Board members, once confident in their authority, now faced a barrage of questions from residents, reporters, and concerned officials. Each inquiry peeled back layers of their carefully constructed facade, revealing the cracks in their governance. In the days that followed, the HOA scrambled to contain the fallout. Press conferences were hastily organized, where board members attempted to spin the narrative in their favor. They emphasized their commitment to community safety and blamed the situation on unforeseen mechanical failures at the dam. Yet, the community's skepticism was palpable. Residents, emboldened by the recent events, demanded accountability and transparency. Petitions circulated rapidly, urging the board to resign and initiate a thorough investigation into their financial practices and decision-making processes. As the days turned into weeks, the repercussions intensified. Local authorities launched an investigation into the dam's operations, scrutinizing whether any negligence or foul play had occurred. Environmental groups joined the fray, expressing concerns about the ecological impact of the drained lake and the potential harm to wildlife habitats. The resort, once a symbol of luxury and leisure, became a focal point of scrutiny, with critics questioning the ethics of investing millions in a development that now appeared precarious and environmentally damaging. Amidst the turmoil, the community began to organize. Town hall meetings transformed into platforms for collective action, where residents voiced their grievances and proposed solutions. Activists emerged from the shadows, rallying support for a grassroots movement aimed at holding the HOA accountable. Social media campaigns gained momentum, drawing attention from beyond the local community and amplifying calls for reform. The once divided residents found common ground in their shared frustrations, uniting against what they perceived as a corrupt and unresponsive leadership. The HOA, once an unassailable entity, now found itself cornered. Legal threats loomed large, with attorneys representing affected residents preparing lawsuits that could expose the board's financial mismanagement and authoritarian tendencies. The board's attempts to regain control faltered as public sentiment shifted decisively against them. The very existence of the HOA hung in the balance, threatened by the rising tide of discontent that had been ignited by the destruction of the bridge and the subsequent chaos. In this crucible of crisis, the community's resilience began to shine through. People who had once felt powerless now stood together, determined to reclaim their voice and reshape their future. The stage was set for a reckoning, one that would redefine the relationship between the HOA and the residents it was meant to serve. The aftermath of my actions unfolded like a slow-motion catastrophe. At first, there was a strange sense of satisfaction, seeing the HOA scramble, watching the resort sit precariously on unstable ground, knowing that the people who had disregarded our voices were now forced to reckon with the consequences of their choices. But that satisfaction was fleeting, replaced almost immediately by the weight of reality. The first call came late one evening, the phone ringing insistently as I sat in the dim glow of my living room, staring at the flickering television screen. It was my lawyer, a friend who had reluctantly agreed to represent me after I admitted what I had done. His voice was tight with urgency. "You need to turn yourself in," he said. "They've got surveillance footage from the dam. You were seen." My stomach dropped. I had been careful, wearing dark clothes, avoiding cameras, but apparently not careful enough. The HOA had wasted no time deploying investigators, combing through security feeds, and following the trail back to me. The news spread fast. Within hours, my name was whispered in hushed tones at town meetings, splashed across headlines, and dissected on local radio stations. Some called me a hero, a lone resistor standing up against corruption. Others branded me reckless, a criminal who had endangered the entire community for personal vendetta. Legal proceedings followed swiftly. Charges were filed: tampering with infrastructure, endangering public safety, destruction of property. The resort owners, furious at the damage caused by the drained lake, demanded restitution. Environmental agencies weighed in, citing potential ecological consequences of the sudden water level drop. The courtroom became my battleground, where prosecutors painted me as a rogue saboteur, and my defense team fought to frame my actions as a last-ditch effort for justice. Through it all, I watched as the community wrestled with its own role in what had happened. Some rallied behind me, organizing fundraisers for my legal defense, arguing that my actions had sparked the conversation they had been trying to start for years. Others distanced themselves, unwilling to associate with someone now labeled a lawbreaker. The divide deepened, but so did the conversation. Ultimately, the court ruled that my actions were extreme, but not entirely unjustified. I received probation, a hefty fine, and mandatory community service, tasks that included working on infrastructure projects aimed at restoring the lake's stability. It was a bittersweet resolution. I had lost my freedom in some ways, but in others, I had won something greater. The HOA had been dismantled, replaced by a newly elected board committed to transparency and community involvement. The bridge, too, was eventually rebuilt, this time with input from the people who had once been ignored. But the scars remained. The lake had changed, the resort had changed, and so had I. In the wake of the chaos that unfolded around the lake, a profound lesson emerged, one that resonated deeply within the community and beyond. The destruction of the bridge and the subsequent draining of the lake served as a stark reminder of the delicate balance between authority and accountability. The HOA, once seen as a necessary governing body, was exposed for its failures, prioritizing profit over people, neglecting the very community it was meant to serve, and operating under a veil of secrecy that bred distrust. The residents, initially passive in the face of such authority, learned the importance of vigilance and engagement in their governance. What transpired was not merely a tale of rebellion against a flawed system but a testament to the power of collective action. The community discovered that their voices mattered, that unity could challenge even the most entrenched powers. As individuals came together to demand transparency, accountability, and justice, they forged a stronger identity rooted in shared values and mutual respect. The experience taught them that complacency breeds corruption and that proactive participation is essential in safeguarding community interests. Moreover, the events highlighted the critical need for open dialogue between governing bodies and the communities they serve. The HOA's unilateral decisions, devoid of resident input, created a chasm of mistrust that widened with each passing day. Moving forward, the community recognized the importance of establishing channels for communication, town hall meetings, regular updates, and collaborative decision-making processes, to ensure that no single entity could operate unchecked. The lessons learned extended beyond mere governance, they underscored the significance of stewardship over shared resources. The lake, once a source of joy and connection, became a symbol of responsibility. Residents understood that protecting their environment and infrastructure was not solely the duty of an HOA but a collective obligation. Initiatives to restore the lake's health and maintain its beauty began to flourish, driven by a newfound commitment to sustainability and community welfare. In essence, the tumultuous journey through conflict and resolution illuminated the path toward a more equitable and engaged community. The bridge was rebuilt, not just physically but metaphorically, connecting people through shared experiences and renewed purpose. The lake, once a site of division, transformed into a rallying point for collaboration and resilience. Ultimately, the story of the lake became a powerful narrative of hope, reminding everyone that even in the darkest moments, the potential for positive change lies within the hands of the community.